What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I'm John Levesque, and I am joined today by Reza Durrani. How's it going, Reza?
Hello, John. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing really well, man. I understand that right now you are captive in your in-laws' house. Is
Yes, I'm
that
held.
true?
Yes, I'm held captive right now but in a good place, San Diego.
Okay.
I'm
Okay,
happy.
good. Man, so Reza has been stuck. He was traveling when all the COVID lockdown happened, and so he hasn't been home in the last month. He's been stuck at his in-laws' house. So the lockdown is double bad for him. Well, anyways, Reza, man, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming. Reza is an MVP, a dual super user, a UG leader. He's basically like the RoboCop of community. Like he is built. He's the machine. And so, man, Reza, it's an honor to have you on the show. I really
Thank
appreciate you coming and joining.
I appreciate you inviting me on your show. It was about time.
Ooh, yeah. All right, I appreciate that. I'll take the call out. You're right, it is. And so to make it up to you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call you out here at some point and say we're just going to go ahead and make the second one together. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what you're going to be teaching us today?
Sure.
How's that?
Absolutely. So everyone, hello. My name is Reza Durrani. I am a Microsoft Business Applications MVP. John kind of gave my intro. I'm a super user. Yes, I'm a dual super user. I'm heavily involved in the community forums. I try to contribute as much as I can, and I encourage others to do the same. So please go ahead and get plugged into the community forums. And if you don't know what they are, I'm sure John will put the link in the description for this video. So do get plugged in, and majority of the stuff what I've learned in PowerPad platform over the course of the last 2 or 3 years is purely because of the forums, because I went in there as a student of the forum, and now I don't want to call that out, but maybe I'm a teacher of the forum now.
You are a master of the forum. That is correct. Own it.
So a lot of learning on the forums, and I think I've got some of that learning here today for this video that we are doing today. And this one is going to be on flow conditional triggers. So we're going to look at how do we use conditional triggers in flow to enhance our experience of flows.
Very cool. And so I understand that you can go ahead and share your screen, and I understand you're going to kind of start with a little bit of overview with us, right? Give us the intro to what are triggers before we jump into conditional triggers.
All right. So let's start with flow. So I am on the home page for flow. And if I go to home and if I go to my flows, this is going to list out all the flows that I have created right here. And then I have my team flows and other types of flows. Now, when you create a flow, each flow is associated with a trigger. And a trigger is what defines the type of the flow. So if I go to new right here, you will notice we have these multiple options here. One of them is called the automated flow. That means the trigger is based on an automated scenario. Example, an item added in a SharePoint list. An instant flow is a type of flow which gets triggered instantly on demand. Then we also have scheduled flows. That means these flows get triggered based on a schedule. And we also have business process flows wherein you can define step-by-step, end-to-end business process solutions. So the types of the flows heavily depend upon the type of the trigger. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and create an instant flow. And I'm going to pick the first option, that is, I will go ahead and manually trigger the flow. And I will click on create. And this takes me to the flow maker experience. And the first thing that you see in the flow maker experience is the trigger that's right on top. Now, any flow that you build has to have one trigger, and it cannot have more than one trigger. Now, why does it have to have one trigger? It's because there needs to be something that calls the flow, that begins the flow, that starts the flow. And that's why the catchphrase triggers the flow.
Totally.
So the first action in flow is called the trigger, and you have to have a trigger for your flow. So that's a very brief introduction on what is a trigger in flow. The next step that I want to lead into is how do we use this concept of conditionally triggering my flows? So let's talk about a scenario here. And in this case, I'm leveraging SharePoint as a data source. And in case of SharePoint, I have a list here called tickets, wherein I'm just maintaining basic ticket information. Now, let's say my requirement is such that every time a ticket is created in this list, I want to trigger a approval process, or I want to trigger a notification to the admin of the system.
That makes sense.
Right? And I only want to do so when the priority of the ticket is probably high. Right? So I only want to notify my admin when the priority of this ticket is high. And typically, when we go down the path of building a flow for this specific scenario, and this is the typical scenario we play out, we go to flow and we're going to pick automated flow because I want to automatically trigger my flow when an item is created in the SharePoint list. And
Yep.
here's my trigger right here.
A good way I describe these automated triggers is it's listening. You're telling Flow, go listen to a system for this specific thing to happen. And that's what automated means. It's listening somewhere for something.
And as John mentioned, it's listening. So it's listening to what in our case, it's listening to SharePoint. So all I need to do in this case is plug in the details of my SharePoint list that I want to listen to. In my case, it's a site in SharePoint called Help Center. And once I pick the site, it will list out all the lists. And I'm going to click on my tickets list. So right now, this flow is listening to my tickets list in my SharePoint repository. And every time an item will be added in this list, this flow will get triggered. So I mentioned that my use cases, I want to get notified if the ticket priority is high, and I don't want a notification otherwise. So the typical scenario is we go ahead and we add a condition in flow, right? And in the condition, we have this dynamic content that we can leverage properties from prior actions in flow. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and pick the ticket priority value. And then I'm going to say if this value is equal to high, in that case, go ahead and send me an email notification. Very simple, very straightforward, right?
Yep.
Nothing
And
special
it's
about
good
this.
here to see all three parts of the flow, right? You get to
Yep.
see a trigger, you get to see some conditional logic, and then we get to see based on an outcome, something happens. And what's that thing? We send an email, right? And so this is the breakdown of every basic flow in the world right here. And so I think this is perfect for the introduction.
All right. So here's a typical flow that I create. And if every time I will create an item in my SharePoint list, because the flow is listening, it will come alive. And because there's a condition that says only get triggered, well, no condition yet. We have a condition action on the flow that says if the ticket priority is high, then go ahead and send Reza an email that a high priority ticket was created in the system. And of course, I can go ahead and beautify my email based on my use case. In this case, I'm just keeping it relatively simple.
Yep.
So I've saved the flow and the flow is ready. Now, if I go back to my ticket list, and let's say I'm just going to go ahead and quickly create a sample item. So I'm going to call this sample item 1. And in this case, I pick the ticket priority as high, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I get one ticket that I created with high priority. I'm also going to go ahead and create another one. I'm going to call this sample item 2. And in this case, I'm going to pick medium priority and click on save. So I just created 2 items in my SharePoint list. And because my flow is always and always listening to an item that's created in the SharePoint list, it should trigger both times.
Yep. And so this is good. I think this is a very common use case, and I think approvals and things like this and conditions, these are very standard, right? You have to have these kinds of decisions in your workflow all the time. And I like actually what you did with the list here, how you kind of customized the status and stuff. I think adding these kinds of little touches to the SharePoint list is pretty nice. It just shows off a nice visual representation for everyone of what's happening there.
Absolutely. All right, so back into flow. As you can see, my flow has run twice. That's because I created those 2 items. And both the times, if I look into my flow history, if I look at my first run, This flow got triggered when I created the first item. The priority value of this ticket was high. So of course it's going to go through the condition. And because the condition succeeded, it will send me an email. Whereas in the second case, the priority of the ticket was medium. So the condition in that case does not succeed. So as you can see, it did not go through the send an email action. So I would have received one email. And of course, if I go to my mailbox, I can see that I received just one email that says your ticket was created. Great.
Awesome.
Now, this works, right? And this is a very simple example, but this can be scaled as much. You can make this as complex as you want. Now, the problem here is that although this works, we are wasting something known as flow runs. Now, what are flow runs? Every time my flow gets triggered, it's counted as a run. So you see, I have the runs segment right here, and it shows that my flow ran twice.
Yep.
But because I only want to send an email when an item is created with a high priority ticket value, it doesn't make sense for me to trigger the flow in all scenarios and then go ahead and do a conditional check and then send an email, right?
Oh yeah, I see. So you're essentially just giving away a flow run that you didn't even really need to happen.
Exactly. I did not
Got it.
need the flow to run when the ticket priority is anything other than high, right?
Yep. Yep.
And this is just one simple example, and I'll elaborate more on this in a while. But the goal here is I need to only run my flow only and only when my condition is met. And that's why the topic for today is called conditional flow triggers. I want to
Got it.
conditionally trigger the flow.
That makes way more sense, especially in this day and age of API calls
Right.
and all these measurements. And I'm sure Reza's going to cover all that after, but it's a super important thing. And I think actually, while you're learning to build flows, if you learn these techniques early on and take these on as best practices, it's going to really set you up in the long run to be efficient and a good steward of your flow runs and the things that you manage, I think.
So flow runs not only add additional history right here. So I have to go and figure out which flow ran at what time and what does it pertain to, because I'm only interested in the ones that are high priority. If I run this flow 50 times, I would have to go and scan here and figure out which one's a high priority. That's problem number one.
Mm.
Problem number two, I'm wasting flow runs. I'm wasting API calls. Problem number three, and I will put a link to this in the description of this video as well. If you go to aka.ms/service limits, Power Automate has limitations in terms of how many flows or API requests you can call in a 24-hour period. And this depends upon your license. This is not a licensing session, but this is something that you need to be aware of, is that based on your license, you only have a set number of API calls that you can make per day. So if I have 50 flows and those flows are getting called for every scenario in which I should not be calling them, I am basically going ahead and wasting API calls, which are precious API calls based upon your license, right?
Totally.
And that's one very important reason to go ahead and start using conditional triggers. Now let's look at trigger conditions. So I'm going to go back and edit the same flow experience, okay? And in this case, I want to add a condition to my trigger. That means I have to take an action on my trigger. So if you go to the three ellipses right here, and if you go to settings, there's an option here called trigger conditions. And what you can add in trigger conditions is something known as expressions. That means now I need to also learn and understand the expression syntax that goes behind flow. And flow leverages, in fact, flow is a subset of Azure Logic Apps. So there is a reference guide to all the expressions that are available as part of flow. And all these functions are listed out here that you can call. So for example, string functions. If I want to concatenate strings together, I can use the concat function. So all of these are functions, and functions can only be leveraged in something known as expressions. And because when I add trigger conditions, I can only add expressions, that means now I need to also understand the expression syntax of flow. Now, thanks to a new feature that is currently in preview, you do not have to learn the expression syntax exactly. When I say expression syntax, what I mean is you don't have to know the ins and outs of the syntax of your expression, because IntelliSense will guide you through as long as you know the different functions that are available. So let's look at how I can enable the new expression editor in Flow. So if I go to settings, and if I go to view all power automate settings, there's an experimental features option here that you can toggle on. And once I click on save, this will refresh my browser and
Now
enable
let
experimental
me add a
features.
quick warning here, really quick.
Yes.
This is an all or nothing selector. If you turn this on, I just want everyone to understand that you get all experimental features. In Power Automate, we don't have selectors for the individual features yet. Power Apps does. That is something we're looking at creating, but just know when you turn this on, you get all of those experimental features. And so just beware. Don't use this in your production flows that are business critical. Use this in testing. Try this out. Have fun with this, but just beware. It's still preview. Okay, please carry on.
And just to add, what I'm demoing right now, although I'm using the experimental feature, I don't have to, because you can write expressions in the old expression editor as well. It's just that the new expression editor is very simple for someone who is new to Flow.
It's way better when
It's
it
way
when it
better.
reaches when it reaches production. It's going to be a fantastic experience.
Right. So now I am in the new expression editor. I'm going to be using the new expression editor. Now, as you can see, my condition is ticket priority is equal to high. And if I hover on the dynamic content, I have the expression right behind that. It says trigger body, question mark, ticket priority, question mark, value. Now, what is all this? What is trigger body? What's ticket priority? What's value? Trigger body means your trigger in the flow. It's referencing the trigger, right? The next step, which says question mark bracket ticket priority. Ticket priority is basically the name of my column in SharePoint. And because my column is of type choice, choice columns have an additional attribute called value associated with it. Every column is different, and their expressions that will be leveraged will be different. Now you don't have to learn this, and I'll show you a trick how to get around this. So this is what I normally do. I add an action in Power Flows, in Flows called Compose. And in Compose, there's this new option right here called Function. And this is because I enabled the preview feature. If I head over to Function, this is the new expression box that opens up for you to write your expressions. Now, in this case, because I'm checking to see if the ticket priority value is equal to high, as I start typing my function, now that's why it's very important for you to know the functions. Now I already know that there's a function called equals. So I'm going to leverage this function and notice how IntelliSense guides me through the entire process. It says equals, you're comparing two objects. Give me object one. Object one is something that I can dynamically search using the search box at the bottom. That's my ticket priority value. And the moment I pick this, notice how it automatically writes that same expression down for me. I don't have to go ahead and understand how the column is structured in SharePoint. I don't have to worry about that. Not just SharePoint, this is true for any data source. And then I'm going to compare this with the word hi, because that's the text that's in my ticket priority column. And that is it for my trigger. The moment I click out, this will create the expression for me. I can copy this expression. I can go back to my trigger action, go back to trigger conditions, and paste my expression. Now, one very important thing to note, right now the trigger conditions is just like a text field. There is no IntelliSense right here. There is no help right here. If I make a mistake, like right now, I know there's a mistake here. So if I click on done, and if I click on save, you notice it throws an error. And all it says is there's an error in your expression. So what's the error? How do I fix this error? That's totally up to me. Now, in my scenario, although my expression is correct, the reason why I have this error is because this is a text-based field. Expressions are recognized with a character called at right in front of them. So all you have to remember is just to place that at symbol, and then whatever expression you've copied, just paste it right in there and you're good to go.
Oh, super helpful tip. That's a good one.
So I'm going to go ahead, click on done. I'm going to go ahead, click on save, and that's it. Right now, I have this expression right here which says trigger my flow only when the ticket priority value is high. Now, the next thing is because my flow is triggering based on the condition, I really don't need this condition in the flow because the flow should only be called if the ticket is of a high priority value.
Makes
In that
sense.
case, sorry, in that case, I can just drag this and place this on the screen. And I don't need this. And I don't even need my compose statement. I just added that because I needed it initially to get the expression so I can plug it into the expression dialog. As easy as that, right? Same
So
flow,
cool.
same functionality, but there are a lot of savings here and I'll show you how. All right, I've saved the flow. I'm going to go back and notice our flow runs are 2. This is from the previous 2 runs.
Yep.
Now I'm going to go ahead and create 2 items. One called sample item 3, and this one will be the high priority item. And I will create another one, sample item 4, and this will be a low priority one. Right? So these are my 2 new items that I just created, one high priority, one low priority. Now in the previous example, it would trigger the flow twice. In this example, if the demo gods are with me, the flow should only trigger once. Let's check it out.
Have you made all your proper offerings today?
I tried to.
Okay. Okay. It's important, you know. Those demo gods can be fickle.
Yeah. So while the flow is running in the back end, and I think the flow just ran because I received one email that says high priority ticket. So let's go back to my flow runs. Let's refresh this. We should only have one more run. And as you can see, it only ran once. And it only ran once for the item which was named ticket 3, which was tagged as high priority.
Nice.
And that is because of the trigger condition.
I love it, man. That is awesome. So now, okay, this is great to show in SharePoint, but to bring it home for users, what are some other ways that this could be used? What are some other examples where they could apply this to save themselves API calls?
Absolutely. So the beauty of trigger conditions is it applies to every trigger, any trigger for that matter. So it's not limited to just SharePoint or SQL or CDS.
Nice.
The key is for you to explore what the trigger condition provide, what the trigger action provides to you. Now in SharePoint, this is a very simple example, right? Maybe I want to only trigger an approval scenario if someone uploads a attachment in my SharePoint list item, right? Now I can get more serious about this, right? And I can keep adding more logic to this. Now we'll cover one more scenario. Let's talk about Teams. So in this scenario, I have a Microsoft team, which is called the CAT team. And we discuss some very important things about the Power Platform over here. Okay. And we are only 2 users, and we 2 users keep discussing about it.
Awesome.
So now let's say I want to only have a flow that I create, and every time someone uploads or someone adds a message in Teams with a high priority marking on it, so I can define a message in Teams and I can say, hey, it's important.
Okay.
I want to trigger my flow so that it can send me an email immediately and tell me that someone has a high important message that I should be looking at, right? Now in the normal world, how would we play this out? Once again, because the trigger is an automated trigger, a service is calling it. In this case, it's Teams. I'm going to search for Teams. And my trigger is when a new channel message is added. So I'm going to click on create. I'm going to pick my team. I'm going to pick the channel for which I want to track the messages. And that's it. And let's say I want to send an email. All I'm going to do is go ahead and send an email, right? I'm going to go and send an email. And I'm going to send an email to myself. And I'm going to say high priority message. And then in the email body, I will put the message body that the user plugs in to Teams. Okay. This is all standard flow actions. But where's the magic? Well, the magic is I want to only trigger this when the message is marked as important, right? Once again, my trick.
Normally we would put in a condition here, right? And then we would say if priority is high, then do this thing, right?
So I'm going to add that same condition, but because I need to steal that expression, I am once again adding the compose action. Yep. And this time again, I'm going to use the equals action, and I'm going to check a property called message importance, right? So there's a property here called message importance. And in this case, I want to check to see if the message importance is high. Okay. That's all I'm doing. I'm checking to see if the message importance is high or not. And this gives me the expression that I can steal, right?
Yep. And
The
so
only
if
reason, yeah, go ahead.
real quick, if you guys aren't familiar with compose, if you're wondering why does he keep putting in this compose card, compose is just kind of like a blank workspace. You can put whatever you want in there and use it in your flow. You can grab timestamps, you can make expressions. It's kind of like a little whiteboard area for you to create. And so if you haven't used it, definitely recommend checking it out. And this is one of the great ways it can be used right here is just grabbing sample stuff and moving it to other places.
And that's what I just did. I grabbed the expression, just copy pasted it right here. And once again, I put the at symbol right in front of it. I'm going to hit done. And that's it. I put my expression right here. So I don't need the compose action right now. So I'm going to delete it. I'm going to go ahead and call this themes flow. I'm going to go ahead and save this.
Super creative name.
Yeah, mixed both those services together.
That's right.
All right. Now I'm going to go into teams with a different persona because I want to show that it works in any scenario. So in this case, let's say a user named James comes in and says, right, and this is just a regular message that he has posted in Teams.
Mm-hmm.
And bad practice, he has not even tagged me. But the point is that he's just added a standard message in Teams, which is not a high priority message. But maybe he needs urgent help on a project, right? So urgent help required in flow expressions. He needs Reza to come in and help figure out an expression syntax in flow. He can call that out and he can mark the message as important, right? And he flags this message as important. Now, both the scenarios are pretty similar. It's just that this message is tagged important.
Yep.
Now, the flow that I created, right? The trigger is when a new channel message is added. That means, imagine how chatty channel messages are, right? You get at least 100 messages a day.
At least.
At least. And maybe two of them are important, right?
Yeah.
Would you want this flow to run 100 times, or would you want this flow to run just those 2 times when somebody marked the message as important?
I don't know if I would ever want this flow to run for me, but but I'm gonna go ahead with the 2 instead of 100.
So as you can see, the scenario is very straightforward, right? We need to leverage trigger conditions to reduce API calls. It's extremely important to understand why we are doing this. More than doing it, it's very important to understand why, right?
Yes.
And if I head back to my flow, and we are still waiting for the flow to trigger.
Okay. That's okay.
And while the flow is running, so you can add this for any other scenario as well. I can think of 100 other scenarios, right? A very common scenario that I run across is sometimes there are triggers that are not available. For example, there is no trigger available that says when an item is modified in SharePoint. There is no trigger. If you go and search for it, that trigger is not available.
Created or modified.
Yeah, there is one called created or modified. But guess what? I can write a condition which says if the created date is not equal to the modified date, only then trigger my flow. Right?
Yeah. Nice.
When the created date and the modified date is the same, that means the item was just created. If they are different, that means the item was modified. Nice. Now, guess what? I can use trigger conditions to create my own scenario, which will only trigger when the item is truly modified.
See that right there? That's a beautiful little, I almost feel like that's as valuable as the rest of the video right there. All the SharePoint people are like, oh, Yeah. Did our flow run here?
Not yet. Still waiting.
Okay, cool.
Still waiting on this flow to run. All right, I think our flow just ran.
There it is.
There it is. So if you noticed, the user put 2 messages in the channel, and the trigger was to trigger the flow when a channel message is added, but only for the high priority or the ones that are marked important.
Yeah.
If you notice, it has only triggered when the message was marked as important. And we can see that in the message body, which is urgent help required in flow expressions. That was the message that the user entered and tagged as urgent.
Very cool. Very cool.
So this can be
Man.
expanded to multiple scenarios, multiple use cases. The key takeaway here is the responsibility for building optimized flows is on the flow maker. Let's not
Yeah.
forget that, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is a flow maker. Me, you, anyone is a flow maker. Anyone can go and create a flow who has a valid license. But I need to also be aware that I have a limited set of calls that I can make in a 24-hour period. And I need to frugally use it. I need to be very sure of the calls that I'm making. Do not call flows in unnecessary scenarios. And
I
I'm
mean,
hoping that this
from
was
the
a great example for that.
I was going to say from the Microsoft side, you can be frivolous. It's okay. No, Reza, that's very good lesson. It's true. It is, the onus is on the flow maker, and this is an amazing lesson. I think anywhere you're using conditions, you should consider, could I use a trigger condition instead of inserting that condition action, which allows my flow to run no matter what? Should I just think of that same thing, build a simple expression and insert it into the condition? And that's going to go ahead and save me. I mean, think about it, 50%. Even if it cut off, 10%, if it saved you 10% of your runs, it's worth it to rethink the possibility of building flows this way. And I know that for some of you, taking the leap into expressions takes us from no code to low code. And for some people, that's scary. But the workflow definition language guide that Reza linked, there's a lot of videos out there. I think Fausto did a series like Express Yourself, and John Liu's constantly doing something. Reza, I'm sure you have tons of stuff as well. And so, get entrenched into this expression language, because it is a little intimidating at first, but if you'll give yourself the time to learn it, the space to learn it, and the commitment to learn it, the possibilities really do grow. As you can see here, even just with how Reza showed you the IntelliSense and how simple just, two different fields comparing each other can save you these kind of runs. And so my call to action on you guys is, this is an amazing intro to trigger conditions and also to expressions, I think, showing how to enable that builder, showing the IntelliSense, explaining how that expression broke down. I think those are some super valuable nuggets out of this. And so take this, go to the next level, go follow Reza. There's going to be a ton of descriptions in the link for him, his YouTube, his Twitter. He's got so much good stuff. Go get subscribed to his YouTube. He teaches like this all the time. And so if you're interested in his style and what he has to say, definitely go and follow all his stuff, okay? Reza, man, thank you so much for joining. This was awesome. I really appreciate you being here and teaching this to us.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure being here, and I hope to come back again soon in future.
That's right. We're going to do another one.
Be sure.
Yes, okay, awesome. All right, you guys heard it here first. He's on the hook for another video, so you'll see him back. All right, guys, that's it from me. Go ahead and click like, click subscribe, smash that little bell so you get notified when the next new video comes out. All right, much love from me. I'll see you in the next one.